So we were talking about John Adams and dealing with the French. And while many people were calling for war, John Adams, just like Washington, was like, no, we need to remain neutral. But there was like a quasi-war going on. So meaning like an undeclared war that wasn't super official, but especially like in the Atlantic Ocean with seizing of ships. So this naval war going on was very real. All right, last page over here. This is important. Yeah, it's all important. So the Alien and Sedition Acts were passed in 1798, and these were passed by the Federalist Congress to limit political opposition. So here's what's happening. You have two things going on. One is a huge, bitter rivalry between the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. And then at the same time, you have this issue of what's going on with France, right? So the Alien and Sedition Acts has a few different parts. On one hand, they want to silence political opponents, right? So Adams and the other Federalists who are in control of the government at this time, they wanted to create laws that basically said you cannot criticize the government, the people in power. Now think about that. That goes against the First Amendment, right? Which is freedom of the press, freedom to assemble, freedom of speech. And so that was basically an act that made it illegal to criticize the government. The other part of these acts would increase time from 5 to 14 years for immigrants to become American citizens. So you want to think, why would they make this law? Well, the Federalists knew that most immigrants were becoming Democratic Republicans. And so in order to limit the amount of power that that political party had, they were like, how about we make it harder to become an immigrant? The other thing, the Alien Acts, that part of it, would be the president could deport or arrest immigrants that he considered to be dangerous. So you had a lot of French, people of French descent in the United States. So people were like, you know what? The Federalists are saying, we can deport you, especially the French, if we feel like you might be an enemy to us. Now, if you're the Democratic Republicans, you're seeing these laws being created about immigration, about the right to free speech and of the press. And you are like, wow, our worst fears are coming true. We worried about a strong central government that was going to take away our rights, and that is exactly what the Federalists are doing. So they want to, led by Jefferson and James Madison, they want to oppose these laws, right, that they felt were essentially unconstitutional, right, went against the Constitution. And so Jefferson wrote what's called the Kentucky Resolution, and Madison wrote what's called the Virginia Resolution, and you're going to read these resolutions on Thursday, the actual resolutions themselves. But basically they said, you know what, the states enter into an agreement, right, to establish this federal government. And the federal government can't do whatever it wants, right? The federal government can only do things that abide by the Constitution. Now, who decides what they do, whether or not it abides by the Constitution or not? What Jefferson and Madison argued is that the states decide that. And so they were like, you know what, as soon as a state identifies that the federal government is going against or defying the Constitution, then the states have a right to nullify or essentially refuse to accept or refuse to follow the laws that the federal government created. Now, this becomes huge because these arguments on nullification that were written by Jefferson and Madison would be later used in like the 1830s by South Carolina when there was a nullification crisis going on. They would be used even later to essentially justify when the southern states seceded from the Union, which would of course result in the Civil War. So we're seeing a lot of connections to these big ideas, to bigger moments in history. Like I said, make sure you're thinking about the themes, right? How do you balance these realities of wanting law and order, but individual rights? What is the role of government in society? What's the role of government in the economy? How much power should the federal government have? When does compromising work? When does it lead to more issues? Think about the rise of political parties. why they existed in the first place. Think about George Washington and the legacy that he established and the precedents that he set. And then think about connections, right, that you can make on laws and issues that were going on during this time period and how it connects to issues we're facing still today, right? Because we can make so many different connections. And as they say, history may not repeat itself, but it certainly does rhyme. All right, so reach out with any questions or comments or whatever you have via email this week. Good luck. Have an awesome week. I'll see you next week.